Welcome to the Truth Expedition. I'm your host, Mark Bischofsky, and on this program, we dig for truth, we scratch, we claw, we grind, and try to find some objective truth in this insane world where fact checkers lie and the media and the government propagandizes us, the citizens. And so today I'm very excited and I'm honored, and what a privilege to have my first in-studio interview with the husband and wife team of Bob Kroll and Liz Collin. So Bob is a 32-year veteran of the Minneapolis Police Department, was the president of the police union here, and I'm sure the viewers know Liz Collin, former WCCO news anchor, award-winning journalist, and author of the new book, They're Lying, and that's going to be the main topic of our conversation today. So thank you guys so much for joining me today.
Happy to be the first studio interview too.
Yeah,
Thanks
it's
for
exciting.
having us, Mark.
So, yeah, I'm sure, like I said, most of the audience probably does know who Liz is. So, but let's just have a little background, like why you became a journalist, and it was a dream of yours.
Yeah. So you've heard my spiel a bit, but yeah, Worthington, Minnesota native. Grew up always wanting to be a television reporter, anchor. Would watch the news really from the time I was 5 or 6 years old, and say, hey, that's what I wanted to be. That's what I wanted to do. I was naturally curious from an early age, and some people called me nosy, I think, back then. But wanted to go ahead and channel that for good. But I left home and went to college in Florida and sort of worked my way up the ranks. I worked in Sioux Falls, Wichita, Kansas, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and then landed kind of the dream job, I called it back then, in 2008 at WCCO, working for the station that I grew up watching back then.
Yeah, so amazing. I mean, I'm a respiratory therapist. I didn't dream of becoming a respiratory therapist. So, having that dream as a kid and then having it come to fruition is amazing. And so I think we just get right into it. And, we're here to talk about your book, They're Lying. And those who watch this program know I trust nothing coming out of the media. I think it's a big pile of lies for the most part and lying by omission. But it's a terrible story, actually, what you had to go through, based on Bob being the police, union president. So when did you decide to write a book about this? Yeah,
never really part of the life plan, I guess, but I still believe in the power of journalism and the power of telling the truth, quite frankly. And I was really troubled by many of the messages the media had been peddling, and I always say it was 5-6 years before I really jump ship when I felt comfortable that there's some sort of platform or something to go and do. That's the problem. You worry about, am I just not even going to have a job anymore? But I kept notes, as I did with many stories I've covered over the years with this case from the beginning, sort of watching my professional and my personal life collide over all of this. And I was just so troubled that there was so much more to this story that the media was just not willing to tackle, not willing to talk about. And frankly, I say that I titled the book, Mark, long before I ever wrote it, because I just kept shouting, they're lying through this whole thing. So put the book out in October. I obviously left WCCO before that, more than a year ago now in January. But put the book out not really knowing what to expect, but I think Minnesotans actually are quite smart and knew there was more going on behind the scenes that we weren't being told.
Yeah, a lot of Minnesotans are smart. I don't know. It seems like 50% are a little lost. I can say that. So yeah, I should mention too, so it's pretty ironic that 4 out of my first 5 guests now have had, their careers altered by what's happened in the last 3 years from the chaos, whether it be this color revolution, whatever you want to call it, or the scamdemic. So your career, I mean, you had the dream job at WCCO, an anchor, and shortly after the George Floyd incident, you're no longer. Did you resign or were you fired?
So I was demoted off the anchor desk basically the very next day. I was never allowed to anchor a newscast again, and that was basically half and half of my role. I was anchoring and then doing reporting, investigative reporting. So I'm taken off the anchor desk, and I'm now told the stories that I can't cover anymore, involving government, politics, policing, a lot of issues that I had spent a dozen years covering at WCCO. I could no longer do. But it was all because of this guy and
Scapegoated.
his in his role. Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, and you ended up resigning in 2021, right? Stepped down from your.
No, I retired. I was set to retire.
Bob's a little bit older than me, Mark. I like to just point that out.
Truth told, everybody thought, well, they had a protest at your house. No, I could have retired August 6th of 2020, and they had a protest scheduled for our house on the 15th of August. I wasn't going to retire. I actually stayed 6 months longer than what I had to.
Okay, so just kind of backing up to that point. So on the 25th, I believe it was the 25th of May, this whole incident happens. I believe it was a drug overdose, and we'll get into that. But Floyd ends up dead, and you couldn't report on it. And immediately, how soon after this? So for those that don't know, there was a protest outside your house, which was just unbelievable what happened there.
There were several.
Yeah, there was one in August, the one that Bob mentioned, sponsored by Black Lives Matter. Two of them were sponsored by Black Lives Matter, but the one in August was larger, 150 people. We had the first protest, I believe, in June, and then some other smaller things that cropped up. But we were in the suburbs of Minneapolis. Took a while for them to find us, but they certainly did, and terrorized our neighbors that summer, for sure. Terrorized us, obviously, sending things in the mail and whatnot. But that's the way the left works. Intimidation, name-calling, no substance, and you saw the media basically fall in line and take that side of things. And that's what I write about in the book, is all of the information that was withheld from the public as a result of the angry mob moving through Minnesota.
Yeah, there's so much. I mean, if you haven't read the book, read it. It is a page-turner. I'm on my second reading right now, is doing research for this interview, but you wouldn't believe what was, outright lying, and I'd say mostly just lying by omission, what they didn't cover. I mean, Chauvin was convicted based on, the public, their opinion. Public opinion convicted him, in my mind. The one Darnella Frazier video, without releasing the body cam footage. When did the body cam footage finally get released?
Really not until trial, which was a departure from every other way we've done it. In every critical incident, and I was on the union board for 25 years. I mean, I didn't just fall out of the sky and become the union president. I worked my way up to that position. I was part of the committee that rolled out the body camera protocol, the procedures that had to be followed with it. The Federation was a part of that process. We collectively worked with the administration, and the result was, after a critical incident, we were allowed to see it. The Federation rep, the attorney, the involved officers were allowed to see their body camera footage. And in this incident, it changed. And they never got to see it until it was time to prepare for trial.
Right, and aren't there questions?
Complete departure of policy.
Whether or not Arredondo even watched it before the firing of the officers?
No, it came out in trial. He did not.
So based on a spectator's video, accused, and guilty in the court of public opinion is more or less what had happened. And I think really things for you, Bob, just blew up after I think you made, I don't remember it word for word, but a logical comment about, hey, let's not jump to conclusions. Let's let this.
Yeah.
But
how dare he?
Yeah, how dare you just wait for facts. I mean, no, let's let the media, convict this man. And I got to say, I ran for office as a Republican, so naturally I am called a racist, homophobe, QAnon, you name it. You're obviously, that's where they just blew up that Bob Kroll's a racist. And if you search, I actually searched my name, Mark Bishofsky's a racist, and thank God there's nothing there for that. But you've got some stuff there.
I bet Bob
all
has a few
allegations, nothing solid.
The best part, Mark, is they're all allegations that have been investigated, and I've been cleared of everything that's out there. And that is the part that the media omits to tell you, is this allegation was that allegation. He was sued for this. They've never given away money on account of me. We've never lost any lawsuit that went to trial. There were cases that the city settled that I had been involved in lawsuits that they settled over my objections to settle. The ones that I convinced them to go to trial, the plaintiffs were given zero. All of the other things that you'll see online about me have been fully investigated, and I was fully cleared, and that's the part that they refused to tell.
That's what I read when I, did a logical search. And, you know, again, lying by omission, and it's just ridiculous how this whole thing unfolded. So going back to there's so much to unpack here, really. Going back to the incident at your house. So this is newsworthy, and they wouldn't let you report on it. Is this correct?
Yeah, so we knew sort of that week, like with all of these, because they're organizing on Facebook, who's going, how many people are going to be there, et cetera. But I don't think we fully realized how many people were going to be at the protest until we saw some of the aerial footage. We were watching on Facebook. We were not there in the neighborhood. My niece was being baptized that weekend, so we were out of town. But we, warned our neighbors. This is the plan, and some of them had been following on Facebook. But it sort of takes a turn when the number of people arrive, but also when you have people shouting into the bullhorn. They're swearing at children. John Thompson is running for office at the time to be a state representative. He's saying that they're going to burn Hugo down, essentially. And we had a neighbor sadly lose their home just a few weeks before. He's making this threat, which is just completely crazy.
To a fire. And all the neighborhood kids are out there watching this house burn to the ground.
Here's this angry man.
3 weeks later, you got a lunatic out here yelling to burn the city down.
But
what kind of impact?
And piñatas.
But then they bring piñatas, piñata effigies that are in our likeness. We're dressed as KKK members, and they're smashing this in our driveway. John Thompson's doing it as well. So I call the newsroom when this is over, and I just say, I think this protest is likely, newsworthy. This guy's running for office, and Minnesota voters should know what this guy was doing, what he was saying. I was quickly told that, this phone call just showed my bias, that they would not be covering it. They eventually did. It took about 3 days for WCCO to cover the protest, and it was about 20 seconds in length. And I also talk about in the book, this is the time when WCCO receives a tip about John Thompson, about his criminal history, about the fact he doesn't live in Minnesota, he lives in Wisconsin. Something also they refused to report on. Took him about 8 or 9 months and that was after he's elected, of course. And the DFL does not even pull their endorsement of him after this display at our house in Hugo either.
And ends up getting elected. Mm-hmm. And thank God, no longer in office.
Yeah.
So now moving on to, there's like Ocasio, this was all these riots that took place. We had politicians really just fueling the fire. And a lot of this in the book, Mayor Fry, Ellison, and people from all over the country, Ocasio, so many people just like fueling the flames for these riots, correct?
Yeah, and I think that's what I wanted to do in the book too, because this was driving me crazy in the newsroom. I'm like, why are we not talking about the past of these people? I always say, it was the perfect people in the perfect positions for this to play out in Minnesota, because you look, no further than Mayor Fry. He's a civil rights attorney. Ellison, that's his background as well. You have Ben Crump coming in as a civil rights attorney, and Bob could speak to that a little bit more with Fry's history. But instead, they're talking about, a case from 20 years ago that Bob Kroll, the union president, is involved in that was clear, and it was just insane to me. I'm like, look at these people and their history, and they've turned this into a race thing when race has nothing to do with it. I've said, nobody wanted to talk about the police officer that was with George Floyd twice as long as Derek Chauvin, who's black. That's Alex King, and I think that there's a reason that they hid the body camera footage the way that they did, because there was so much more to the story, and this wasn't a racist incident, period. And nobody from the media would ask that question.
Yeah, and I think Ellison even agreed that it wasn't.
Right, on 60 Minutes, yeah.
Well, and not just the body camera footage. There's footage of Floyd in the store for 10 to 15 minutes prior, just acting bizarre.
Crazy.
And another thing that they lied about was that he had any prior contact with Minneapolis police. Oh, no, nothing at
Never
all.
Heard
well,
of him.
Guess what? 11 to 12 months earlier, Floyd had the exact same behavior, although this time they got him medical attention and possibly saved his life. He was arrested for an undercover narcotics investigation when he was selling fentanyl. Yep. And he displayed identical behavior.
Yeah, wouldn't put his hands on the dash, asking for mama.
Right.
Almost identical.
But you have the very next day the police chief and the mayor saying, never heard of this guy, we've never had anything to do with it. Just outright lying.
bullshit. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. The man was a career criminal.
Yes.
A career criminal. He's obviously high on drugs, and there's all kinds of videos, surveillance videos showing him high on drugs, bizarre behavior.
And that's one of the key points in the media turned on me on that, because I would always interview. I was always helpful whenever I could be to local media on police-involved situations. I came out and exposed. They were not talking about the prison time that he did in his criminal history in Texas. And I said, the media is ignoring this. So then they turned on me like right now, and that made me a racist by bringing facts to light.
Yeah, it's like he became a modern-day messiah.
And he still is in many places.
Right. I mean, you know, and it's unfortunate, and he's no longer alive, you know, obviously. But a career criminal, acting bizarre, after committing a crime, is resisting arrest, obviously high on drugs, and the police, following procedure, which they also omitted too, this maximum restraint technique is trained.
Correct.
It is procedure, but that was hidden from the public too. I mean, everything leading up to the trial, and a lot of it does come out in trial, but he's
small.
already convicted
Right.
in the court of public opinion. Didn't one of the jurors or witnesses get like pig blood spread on their...
Yeah, that was
Use of force expert.
Use of force expert.
They thought he still lived at an address in California, but he was the defense use of force expert, a retired police officer from California, and they did left pig's head and smeared in his yard and smeared blood on what they thought was his home. Turned out not to be.
Well, and that's the point too. You know, talking about the book in that trial section. I mean, intimidation tactics, and everybody was fearful for their lives. We say, you know, look no further than us. With, you know, at a minimum you're canceled, but at a maximum you're perhaps killed if you don't come to the right conclusion here. So nobody was going to, you know, go along and give a not guilty verdict.
Right. I'm sure you got, you know, I don't know, you don't look like someone who ever gets terrified, but I'm sure for you, and I believe you've got a child, and having to deal with all of this, and yeah, that's got to be, you know.
Yeah, your average juror saw what was happening. The public was so whipped up, or one side of the public was, and you've got Maxine Waters coming in calling for unrest. I mean, this was a national deal, and you're under the microscope, and the televised trial and things like that. The no change of venue. There's no way that these guys got a fair trial. There's no one sitting on that jury was going to stick their neck out and come to a not guilty conclusion.
Yeah, and I think didn't the panel of 3 judges just deny Chauvin change of venue?
Yes.
They denied his appeal, so they likely will, you know, next go to the Minnesota State Supreme Court and perhaps all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Yeah, it's
an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah, and there's, I mean, some say it should never even went to trial if you really look at all of the evidence.
Well, I think that's just where Keith Ellison comes into play also, and I thought that his background played such an important part in this story that nobody was willing to talk about. There's a reason that 5 Minnesota police officers were in prison. Kim Potter is now out after yesterday, but you have many would consider trumped up charges on all of these cases. And he, you know, ran his mouth a bit right after this case as well, and said that, you know, the only thing he's after is a guilty verdict, et cetera. There was not much caring for the facts. There was a, you know, complete disregard in many opinions.
Yeah, and Ellison's got to, and you've got to read the book. I mean, we're only going to be able to touch on a little bit of it here, but Ellison's history, I mean, he's an Antifa supporter. And actually, when going back, so Michael Freeman, who's the Hennepin County attorney at the time, is kind of asked to step aside, I believe, by tyrant Tim Walz. And then Ellison takes over the case. And from what you can see is that Freeman was basically seemed reluctant to even press charges.
Yeah, there's, and it's in the book, on a meeting that top county attorneys had with the ME, and that's where things go really
yeah, it
sideways.
takes about a week for them to actually even release his autopsy, and you can kind of see what's happening behind the scenes with all that. And you had one of Freeman's assistants basically say, we don't, you know, want to charge these other officers, the 3 officers, and basically what was happening with all of that to go ahead and move those charges forward.
Yeah, and I think based on just Darnella Fraser's video, you know, the court of public opinion, they probably felt like they had to do something. I mean, if I imagine if you don't charge these officers and fire them, the city's going to burn worse than it did, but that is still no reason to not, you know, they could have done it all different, release the body cam footage, let people know Floyd's history, calm the situation that way with facts instead of fueling the flames.
There were many ways to mitigate this ahead of time, and other agencies across the country do it much better. Put out the things and say, the big thing is the officers were cooperating in the process. It's not like they were resistant. The Federation wasn't putting up any roadblocks. The Federation involvement was get an attorney, and that's the end of it. We were out, but they'd have you think the Police Federation kept them on the job and all this. But there were so many different ways to handle the riots, from what was put out to the public to the way the riots themselves were handled. They just let it go. The giving away the 3rd Precinct was by design. They wanted to make it a symbolic victory. They could have quelled these early on and shut it down, but and the Guard was held back by walls. They were not allowed to deploy effectively and efficiently as they could have and should have and were prepared to do.
Yeah, unbelievable. Yeah, so that's another thing we should maybe mention is how the 3rd Precinct was given up. Purposefully, thinking that was going to calm things down. And wasn't there almost some conversation of kind of hoping an officer gets injured or something to...
These officers speak out, you know, for the first time. That was something that was so troubling to me, too. All these riots happen, and nobody in the media is even going back to even tell these, you know, horrific stories of what these officers went through. You could clearly see that, you know, they were being scapegoated and, you know, basically, you know, not told to wear their helmets, or they couldn't have their riot gear, and then being faced with these, you know, mobs throwing rocks and bottles at them. But one of the command, he's a SWAT commander, talks about Gary Nelson, that they are allowed to clear out the 3rd Precinct. They bring a city bus to the front of the precinct that day as they're all packing in evidence or their personal belongings. And then that bus is supposed to be there for them when they decide to go ahead and evacuate. And the bus is late to pick them up. And not only that, it's parked a half mile away because they want the officers to run through the crowds and go ahead and take some of this debris. They don't want an officer to be killed.
All optics.
Just hurt, perhaps, in the process. And he's telling this story so matter-of-factly, and I'm just thinking, this is absolutely horrific, you know. And I don't know how people weren't charged criminally for, you know, this type of behavior or this type of, you know, plan, if you can even call it that. But it's so disturbing to hear those stories.
Who do you think made that final decision to give up the precinct?
They're pointing fingers at each other like crazy now.
Yeah,
in a situation like this, the chief of police would be in charge, but then the commissioner of public safety, John Harrington, came in, and it went above the mayor to the governor. So they're all pointing, who knows? There is a protocol in effect that if the governor takes over the scene and the National Guard is rolled out, there they are. That's it. So at this point, I would when they're on scene, I would have to say the governor is in charge of the whole operation. So.
Yeah, and they're all, you know, from the left. Who knows? I'm sure there's conversations going on amongst them all. And
well, and the irony of the whole thing is the group that is out there doing this, throwing rocks at the officers and bottles and things, they would be the first people to call out any type of stereotyping whatsoever. But because some officers in their minds did something wrong, everybody else wearing a police uniform is guilty for it, so we're going to injure them.
Yeah.
Think of the senselessness of that.
Yeah, and then the aftermath of lack of police officers, what they've done, the defund the police movement, everything that happened there. Just, you know, we're seeing crime now, and I think that's what I was going to say before. Ocasio-Cortez said something about how many black men are killed by police each year, which isn't true. It's I think for instance in Minneapolis, I just looked. So I think it was last year, 83% of just murder victims were of color. 89% of the shooters were of color. They completely ignore the fact that most of the killing is you know, unfortunately, black people killing black people, but they don't have anything to say about this. The Black Lives Matter movement just wants to single out the cops and make it difficult for them to keep the peace.
Well, and Black Lives Matter, it was a money grab from the very beginning with all of this. And that's what bothered me as reporters just sat silent. And instead, they were using, people that I was working with used the hashtag Black Lives Matter in their reporting. Some of them still do to this day, people that work for national networks and such. And this had nothing to do with that. We have Black Lives Matter raising, I think, $86 million on the back of George Floyd, essentially. And, we followed the money and didn't go to help Black lives. And you talk about these, murders that have happened. The media spends, 20, 30 seconds sometimes on these people, but yet, George Floyd, it's his anniversary, of his death that we have to see, his birthday that's celebrated, that's happened in the case of Dante Wright, et cetera. And I just felt like, it's basically the media propping up evil and perpetuating that rather than caring about facts and the full picture.
Yeah, facts don't matter anymore. It's in this world, it seems to me that the push is to have us accept subjective truth rather than objective truth. And to me, again, it's about, a conflicted and confused population is really easy to control. So, but, BLM, like you said, I think it was almost $90 million. And what's profound is if you follow that money trail, big mansions being purchased for profit in the end, and multiple millions of these dollars are going to trans groups. And all on the back of this whole George Floyd movement.
And the media sits silent. And you've seen Black Lives Matter, for the most part, kind of fizzle out. I think they've cropped up with a new name now or something. But for what it was, it really is quite remarkable for what happened. And and we're paying the consequences, living the consequences, to this day with crime in Minnesota.
Yeah, $90 million almost. I mean, where's the community center in Minneapolis?
Right.
Where's this money going? Is any of it? They're connected with Act Blue. BLM is to a certain degree. It's a political organization connected to the woke agenda, no question. Marxism. They hate this country. They don't like freedom. And that's the type of world we're living in right now. And that's why I'm in this seat, because I can't stand it anymore.
That's why we're here too. Yes, it's true.
Fighting. We have to put up a fight. No one's coming to save us. America's the greatest country in the history of the world. Continues to be so, but for how much longer? And there's nowhere to run. No one's coming to save us. Unfortunately, I don't necessarily trust legislators either. I think, if anything, we can hope that the courts will start to make them uphold the Constitution, but it might just come down to us, the people, and noncompliance and civil disobedience and waking other people up, because it's a scary world. And then getting back to the book, again, please do read this book. Where's the easiest place to get it?
It is on Amazon. Barnes & Noble sells it online as well, but there are links on thelieexposed.com. So I have paperbacks, hardcovers. Also, the audio version is available. So that's easy if you'd rather listen. I think Bob actually listened to it. He didn't read it. But we're also working on a documentary now, too.
Yeah, and we should talk about that, too, and we'll put it on screen where we can crowdfund, help Liz get the money needed.
Thanks, Mark.
to make this documentary, because this story needs to be told. Buy this book and buy 5 more to give to people that might even be, Democrat or on the left or whatever, because if you can't deny when you read it. I'm sure there are people that are just completely putting up this wall where they can't accept truth. That's a problem in this world too, but this is an important story, and it can help to open up some eyes.
Yeah, I've said that I've heard from people on the other side that gave the book a chance and then, emailed me and thanked me for writing it. I think Bob actually just sold.
I just sold one this morning at the gym to someone on the left that
yeah.
heard Liz on a radio show and said, hey, I got to read this.
But I'll just say, my background has not been political. I've really been a fact kind of middle of the road type reporter, because that's who I think, that's kind of what you need to be as a reporter. But as a Christian, I was really very bothered, perpetuating a lot of these things that are just evil in my opinion. And everybody comes back to, the video. It looked horrible. This is wrong. And I acknowledge, and I acknowledge that in the book that, it did. Yeah, it bothered me watching it as well. But knowing that there was so much more to this story, and seeing how George Floyd behaved a year earlier, which was very similar in manner. And also, if I think the people were shown this 15 minutes of resistance that happens by George Floyd, how George Floyd is saying he can't breathe long before Derek Chauvin arrives on scene, how George Floyd is actually the one who asks to lay on the street.
Yeah.
And it's him that asks to come out of the squad car. But people, didn't know about that. They weren't told about it. So how would they have that information to make these decisions?
And they were told, I believe I saw in the media, I stopped watching, mainstream news anymore, but that technique, the maximum restraint technique, wasn't
a part of training.
Wasn't part of training. So just outright lies. And then even in court, it came up where I don't remember who it was on the witness stand said, yeah, it looks like the knees, more on his shoulder blade than his neck.
The chief.
That was the chief.
Yeah. So
said that.
You cannot say I can't breathe, with the gusto that he's saying it. If you can't say it without breathing.
If you can't breathe, you can't talk.
Right. Yeah.
And he talks throughout.
And there's no strangulation marks. I mean, the autopsy is very telling in and of
let's
itself.
Get into that.
Yeah. And we have some medical experts speaking for the documentary that I think will be really quite eye-opening, and how they tried to get the information to the judge, to the medical examiner, but there was definitely this disregard for the facts and truth in this case.
Yeah, I mean, lethal, cocktail of drugs in his system. But, if you put that amount in any one of us, we're going to be dead. I suppose if you've got, a tolerance. But, yeah, lethal cocktail of drugs in his system. There's so much happening that, again, they're lying about so many things. I do want to get into, as much as we can here, because this is the deep story here, but Ellison and his ties to, the vice lords. And that's, this is the kind of amazing stuff you're going to read in this book, but when Ellison was a defense attorney, he defended a lot of the vice lords people, and this intertwines back many years on how this all evolves between him and Freeman and the governor. But Officer Jerry Haff, when was that?
I lived through that. That was Officer Jerry Hoff in September 25th of 1992 was shot and killed at the Pizza Shack, which I was a patrolman in the 3rd Precinct. It was in the heart of my district. I was off that night, but I worked the next several days, and Ellison's involvement in all of that was profound. He was known as the gang attorney. He was always representing gang members in criminal cases at that time. The biggest thing that sticks out about this one was when they surrendered at the end of the investigation, and Wade Pepe McKenzie, the shooter, was returned from Chicago with Rick Capcella from Care 11 and Keith Ellison on camera. And his theory then that if they didn't do this on live television, the police would kill him. And I arrested and transported Monterey Willis, one of the shooters, that night on the following days, and I transported him to jail. He was not harmed. So this is a false narrative that Keith Ellison had developed back then. We always knew him as a gang attorney, and he was very anti-police. He hated the police. He was known for filing complaints against the police unfounded all the time.
And also, I wanted to make the connection as a reporter because these records are so easy to find, and they still are too, with Keith Ellison's connections to these gang members who are now basically being paid as the police staff of Minneapolis in a way. These nonprofits that have cropped up that are getting hundreds of thousands of taxpayer dollars from Minneapolis to do the policing. This was also a money grab for Keith Ellison's friends.
The violence interrupters.
And associates. There's many groups that he has ties to, and his son being on the city council as well.
Unbelievably corrupt. So I'm going to read a quote that Ellison made in 1992. Black people do not live under democracy. You don't have an obligation to obey government that considers you to be less human. So that's
back then.
His perspective going back all the way to 1992, and then, then becoming the worst attorney general in the history of the world, and winning again this past election cycle. What did this whole, the riots. So let's go to that. So I'm getting asked by a lot of questions by, my audience. were the riots staged? The guy that broke the first piece of glass, there was all these conspiracy theories, rumors about who this guy was, and
Yeah, we think that through just research that at this point, I think there's definitely a coordinated effort with the riots. You had airport police talking about people coming, from a lot from
Coming in from out of town.
Oregon.
There was an influx of
Yeah, there
people.
was influx within hours, so they were sort of ready to go. And also, Candace Owens in her documentary, "The Greatest Lie Ever Sold," goes into a bit of that. These places that train protesters, that they're basically ready and ready to go. So I do think there was a coordinated effort behind the scenes, because it's very strange how it happened very, very quickly. And also there seems to be some sort of coordination in the fact that it took so long to respond. Well, meanwhile, the National Guard says they're ready. The police department's obviously ready for, there's been riots before. I mean, Bob,
Yeah, and
nothing like this,
no, and
that you let it get this far out of hand.
they did have people come in from out of town, of course, but contrary to what Wall said at that time, about like 85% of the limited number of arrests that were made were from local Minnesota people. So he tried to say that everybody was from out of town, and we don't behave this way in Minnesota. But there were key agitators brought in that were trained. But back to the riots, they could have been shut down very early on. I was a supervisor at several of the U of M hockey riots, if you will, back in years ago that they had, and we quelled them in hours because we were allowed, the leaders on the ground were allowed to control it. We didn't have politicians above us telling us what force we could use. In the beginning, they didn't want the officers out there wearing protective gear because they thought it looked intimidating. So they're sitting there getting pelted with rocks with no protective gear. They have what we call turtle suits. They weren't allowed to put any of that on, which is helmet, chest protectors, leg protectors, none of that, because it would look offensive. But the way they were held back and the way mutual aid was limited and the way the National Guard was held back, it was a planned giveaway. We got word that morning on the Thursday of that first week that everybody had to have their personal effects evacuated from the 3rd precinct by 2 p.m. And they didn't give it away until around 10, 11 o'clock that night. It was staged and planned, the giveaway.
And they think that that's going to quell it, and it just puts more fuel
It
on the
ignited
fire.
it.
And
It
just
ignited
the
it.
lack of leadership, too, as you'll read in the book, how so many of these police officers trying to do their job to stop some of these rioters, a lack of leadership, a lack of direction, and the danger that they were put into. And many of these people resigned, as you'll read in the book. And
Yeah, you have a police force down by about 40%. I mean, there was up to about 900
It was
cops.
around 900, authorized strength of 888 down to somewhere around 500 now.
Yeah, and losing people every day, and they really can't find anybody to fill
the
these
number
positions.
of applicants is like
Yeah.
next to
And that's
nothing.
statewide. Well, it's countrywide, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we see, what's happening is the crime is just through the roof. I think 2021 was record levels of homicide.
Well, they don't want to talk about the homicide rate, and this goes back to Chief Arredondo saying we're going to be on the right side of history with this. Arredondo himself asked for 400 more police officers over a 5-year period from the mayor and council, and he got none of them. In fact, they got reduced.
This is long
Before all the riots happened. This is back, in his first start of his term as chief. He asked for more. They didn't give him any. But if you pull out the year 1995, when we had 97 homicides, nothing else comes close in the history of Minneapolis in the last 3 years. Those are the highest. Extracting that 1 year, they're the 3 highest, not just consecutive years, the 3 highest murder rates of all time in Minneapolis, back-to-back 3 years in a row.
And you could say back then, too, you have the crack wave, the crack epidemic. Now you have college kids being murdered, outside downtown clubs, and they've also pulled out the numbers now where if you die in a car accident, if you're, killed by someone who stole a car, which happens daily, obviously now, by the dozens, they don't put those people in the homicide count.
They're
in a
skewing
separate,
the numbers.
Yeah.
If it's a vehicular homicide, a person can be tried and convicted of vehicular homicide, but they don't count that as a homicide.
As a homicide.
Oh.
Yeah. But
So
these are
they're
innocent
tampering with
lives
the
being
numbers.
taken.
Massaging the numbers. Yeah, and then carjackings too, I'm sure.
Correct.
We all know. I mean, they're like through the roof.
Yeah.
Prior to this, they were relatively non-existent, and now they're just
It
commonplace.
was up 500 and some odd percent from 20 to 21 and 22 2. I think they are actually down over the last quarter is what I just did a little research, and they're down a little bit. But there were 700 auto thefts and at least pushing 40 carjackings in this January of this year. So it's still just crazy unsafe out there. You know, people are afraid to go to Minneapolis.
For good reason.
I don't
Very
want to go
good
to a
reason.
Twins game at night. I don't. With my family.
You had somebody shot on the light rail platform last Twin season at 5 in the afternoon. Yeah.
Unreal. And then they want to take away my right to, I know that's their goal eventually, is my right to carry, you know, the Second Amendment. So it's just tragic in so many ways. And I do have to ask, though, and I talked to Bob a little bit about this. I think you were not in the room, Liz, but I'm getting asked by so many people in my audience about, was this whole event staged? Was the whole thing, is Floyd even dead? Is Chauvin an actor? So it would be I'm doing my duty to bring it up. I did show Bob, and we're going to roll the video. I won't play it now, but a video where it shows Tao kind of waving the spectators in, for lack of better words, to the scene. And they come walking in, and it gives Darnella Frazier a really close perspective to create this video.
Yeah, we've been through this before. It's a common question that we get as well, and we're in touch with Chauvin in prison. You know, I know his family.
Right.
We're, you know, Lane obviously was there, and other people that were there that I've talked to too. And George Floyd is dead.
That's the first time I've seen that footage with
I know it,
with Tao like that, and I don't know what he was actually doing, but you know, I'm here to tell you that Floyd had contact with officers Tom Lane and Alex King for 15 minutes before any arrival of Tao and Chauvin, and you know, they're brand new. They had no contacts. He doesn't even know who's going to roll up. I'm looking back, being a supervisor there, I'm wondering where was the supervisor early on. That could have changed things early too. But you hear, did they have a history together? Did Chauvin work at the El Rodeo with Floyd and all that? And they work there, but separate times in life. And Tao had no contact. I didn't know about the waving in, but no, I'm here to tell you that I saw on camera George Floyd died. I saw on camera Tom Lane trying to bring him back. I was in touch with Tom Lane throughout. I mean, he just had a baby. These guys are in prison, and they're not just doing it for any cause or any.
Right. I don't discount anything in this world, but how extravagant must a conspiracy be to have that many players and to not have. I mean, I've thought it through. What about the people at the hospital? I mean, the list goes on. You'd have to orchestrate. I mean, you'd have to be MK Ultra, you know, in order for this to be.
Sadly, this is reality. Yeah.
Sadly. Yeah.
It was the perfect storm for all the wrong reasons, you know.
And you had this state especially too. I think it was kind of the perfect, as you know, talked about the type of people for this, and it's basically led by outsiders. When you look at Tim Walz, when you look at Ellison, Mayor Fry, nobody's from Minnesota.
They
don't actually care. They're using this for political gain, for political purposes.
Correct.
Yeah.
That's my personal feeling.
Climbing a ladder like Walz, it's been teased as being the next president. Oh.
Yeah.
Tragic might that be.
Laugh now.
And then as far as the conspiracy angle, I will say the one thing, when I first saw the video, again, it did look horrific, and that's all you were given. I knew there was going to be more to the story, but what was alarming to me is how, so after the ambulance pulled up, they rolled Floyd over. Obviously, he's at that point unconscious and likely without a pulse. But the medics, and I've done CPR on hundreds of people. I'm an expert ACLS trained, and you immediately are supposed to start compressions. The first thing in my mind would be get a pulse. If there is no pulse, you rip that shirt off, you put the defibrillator pads on, and you start compressing the chest immediately, because it's not minutes matter, it's literally seconds. And so to me, outwardly, like to my wife, like, what are they doing here? You need to start compressions right now. They didn't, and in fact, you can see in some video that I saw, it was a good minute or two at least before the time he was brought in the ambulance.
There's a very lackadaisical response.
It's just what I was going to say.
Yeah.
It was a very delayed response, no action, and they should have and could have been there earlier. They were staged a ways away, and the telecommunicator could have rolled fire on it, which is higher. They're trained to a higher degree in EMS than law enforcement, and they could have been there too. And they didn't start. They didn't start the fire rig rolling. So there were a lot of factors combined in that too, where errors were committed in other places.
Do you feel like there was a sense of feeling like they were in danger to not just start compressions there too?
Yeah, they I don't know why they didn't start it. Just they kind of get out and lollygag over to them, and I don't know.
But then you have these paramedics then take the stand and squarely put the blame on the officers when you have Thomas Lane in the back asking, "What can I do? Should I start?" He's definitely concerned and wants to. So that there's, I think, more to come with that in the documentary.
In the
as
documentary
well.
and the book, they get into the levels of fentanyl. They get into the wooden chest syndrome. There's a lot of things that are touched on, and then most importantly, the medical examiner changing his opinion, and then how the family hired medical examiners are experts.
Mm-hmm.
Well, right, and didn't they hire, like, there was so much corruption, things I didn't realize could even take place, but there was, the prosecution had about 400, almost 400 people on their witness list, and so it was like this strategy for them to get a hold of every medical examiner in the country
right away,
so that the defense, once they called, they couldn't utilize their
they
expertise.
create a conflict of interest where they cannot consult if they've already had prior consultation with the other side.
So smart strategy.
Yeah.
Corrupt,
right?
And not looking for truth in the end, looking for a conviction.
That's not the job of a prosecutor.
Yeah, looking for a conviction to usher in this color revolution where now I'm white, so I'm an oppressor, and black people are oppressed, and I'm not racist at all. But this is the world we're living in, and it's never let a good crisis go to waste. So I don't believe it was a staged event, but sure as hell they did not let the crisis go to waste, and we see what's happening now. And there was haystacking going on. The whole the process of this trial was absolutely corrupted 100%. So this concept of haystacking, where one little tidbit in the book you're going to read is how, like, a digital file completely organized with evidence is completely organized and then given to the defense attorney, where it's all just separated out in no order.
It's printed and
thousands
put
of
in,
pages.
and just delivered hours before they're expected.
It could have been handed over and a disc and been done.
Right.
In
so
the same organization, but instead they got mounds of paperwork to sort of sift through. And when you compare the team of attorneys versus one attorney, and they took over 2 floors in the Hennepin County Government Center, our homicide investigators would wish that they would take over 2 floors for some of the big murders that they investigate that never got a fraction of that prosecution.
And this is just the prosecution that took up 2 floors, yeah.
Yeah, it's all unbelievable. So please do read the book. I do. I'd be remiss if I didn't talk, just generally speaking, about the media. And were you, because that was another question, please ask her, were you controlled as to what you could report on at CCO? I mean, at what level is, because right now there's a narrative when it comes to this scamdemic where you can't report.
Yeah, and I think I talked about kind of 5-6 years. I was really troubled. We were really perpetuating this whole police officers are the bad guys, and we're going to go into their history and all this. And I just really didn't think that it's necessary or newsworthy for that matter. Putting these people on camera again and again who are paid activists. Their pockets are being lined for taking this stance against the police, and we don't point that out. I mean, to me, that's irresponsible. So I would, sometimes fight about that. There's definitely a palpable hatred in that newsroom for Donald Trump. I think that's most newsrooms, and that was something that would be discussed at press conferences when I would be with other members of the media and such. So and then, candidate Trump, President Trump, et cetera, but COVID especially, we started getting information about, and this is why I jumped to Alpha News as well, vaccine injuries, different things that people didn't agree with in the hospital and whatnot, but it was very clear early on that we weren't going to put any of that information on the air.
Yeah, because you were still employed for a portion, the front end of the pandemic, correct?
Yeah, so many people then would tell me, now that I've jumped ship and gone to Alpha, we tried to get the attention of all the local stations. We've been emailing. Nobody, nobody will listen to us. The Star Tribune won't. And these are pretty horrific things that have happened to people, as you know, in the wake of the pandemic. But they're stories that, there's reason the media is not covering them. So.
Yeah, and it continues. They started with this vaccine's 100% safe and effective, then 95%, and
right.
then 80, and then 50, and then, they finally admit they never studied it for transmissibility, if it was going to stop transmission. Masks, there's a huge study that just came out from the Cochrane Review, which is the gold standard of meta-analysis of medical studies, that the masks don't work. They looked at every study pre and post pandemic, shows that there's essentially no effect from these masks, the harms that they do to kids, and all of this. I can't believe there wasn't one, even Fox wasn't reporting on this stuff. It was all just alternative news, if at all. And it continues right now with the excess death we're seeing. They're not reporting on this. And anyone who looks at my Facebook feed will see it's basically a died suddenly feed. The amount of people dying in this country, in the UK, excess death, there's 50 excess deaths per week after the vaccine rollout, more than during the pandemic, while they had a death ticker on the TV. But the media is not reporting on this, and it's bizarre.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
yeah, and I think that that's why I think the future is independent media. I just think that's people are turning off mainstream sources, because you really are just getting the same story in the same order, and they're barely even talking about what you even need to know when it comes to these topics. It's just kind of glossing over things and then moving on to the next. And here's weather.
Right.
Yeah.
That's what I say to people. Yeah. People are they think they're being informed by watching, in Minneapolis, it's 4, 5, 9, or 11. Watch 10 minutes of news at 6, and they think they're informed.
Right.
And there's so much more to the story. And
sometimes completely opposite of what you've been told.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, they lie. I mean, it's legal now to propagandize United States citizens, and I believe it's happening. And with Tucker Carlson now, we see, who knows exactly why they parted ways. But some believe it was from his monologue on April 19th, talking about how Big Pharma controls the narrative, and that's just a step too far, because Big Pharma provides anywhere from 40 to 70% of ad revenue for these big networks, so you can't.
Yeah, and I think, the Tucker Carlson lesson, too, is you just don't need these big networks. He'll have a big audience. He'll go somewhere and be just fine if he still wants to work after his $1 million payout or whatever.
I'm sure he can retire 10 times over without any problem. But I have a feeling he's going to be back. I think he's passionate about the work he does, and he'll be back and probably be bigger, better, and wealthier for it. And Fox will be, they just gave up, their top, reporter. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense, which shows they don't care to tell the truth. But where can we find you, Liz, on Alpha News, right?
Yep, so I'm with Alpha News, so it's alphanews.org. You can actually sign up for our free daily newsletter there. We don't spam you or anything. You just get our top 5 stories of the day, but we have a YouTube channel. We're on Rumble. Rumble, that's our people for sure. YouTube takes us off every now and then when we get too crazy.
Too truthful.
Yeah, so Alpha News MN. There, and thelieexposed.com for all the book things. I'm still kind of touring the state with Bob's Bookmobile here. We're going around meeting some great people, talking about this case, taking questions, and gearing up for this documentary we're shooting this summer.
So it's thelieexposed.com. So buy the book. And do you have a video show as well? I mean, you obviously write journalism. But
yeah, so that's where I put my weekly podcast is video and audio. It's called Liz Collin Reports. I say it's a very clever name. No, but I also do video stories, too, that we put on Alpha News, the website, and it goes to our YouTube channel and Rumble, et cetera. So I actually just put out yesterday talking about the FDA protocols and such. I know topic near and dear to your heart, and some people, some Minnesotans fighting that battle. currently as
Yeah,
well.
read that article. It's Nicole Riggs. Her dad, I believe, she claims murdered by the hospital protocols. So very interesting article, and thank goodness there's at least one local journalist who's willing to tackle these important subjects. So when will the documentary? When do you perceive that it might be ready?
We're hoping fall. That's the goal.
So it's in the works right now.
It is in the works. Yep. And then we'll be shooting this summer, and we hope fall. So hopefully it'll be nice eventually. So we got a lot of outside shooting to
So
do.
please do go and to donate. Is it at the?
Oh, thank you. Yes, I have to get used to begging for money. This is a crowdfunded documentary. So if people are willing, I say even to donate, $5-10, it all goes to production costs. I'm working with Defend the Heroes. It's a nonprofit, so any donation is tax deductible. But it's all on. That's on thelieexposed.com. A link will get you there. But there's also a separate website called they'relyingthemovie.com. And that's where you can click the link to donate as well.
So yeah, please do that. This is how we change the world, is getting this information out. And sure, there's a certain degree of it's an echo chamber, but people are seeing this content, they're reading these books, they're seeing these documentaries, and slowly we're waking people up. And that's how we're going to change this world. And if you don't do something, who's going to? So please, join us in this truth-seeking endeavor, freedom-fighting endeavor, so that our kids can live in a decent world. That's, I think, why we're doing everything we do here. So I want to thank you so much for tuning in to the Truth Expedition. It's been a pleasure, an honor, a privilege to have Bob and Liz spend some time with me here today.
Thank you, Mark, very much for having us. Time went by fast.
Yeah, it did. So this episode will air on Mondays at 7 p.m. It's every Monday at 7 p.m. And keep tuning in. Please share the channel, rumble.com, The Truth Expedition. Stay free, don't tread on me, and don't shed on me.